Hi everybody, I'm here with Josh today. We're going to do another show on Gurdjieff. So we've got Josh, Denny with me. And I'm going to start with a views from the real world quote before we go in. So this is views from the real world, page 136 in my copy. When a man is born, 3 separate machines are born with him, which continue to form till his death. These machines have nothing in common with one another. They are our body, our essence, and our personality. The development of each one separately depends on the data a man possesses and the data which surround him. For the body, these are heredity, geographical conditions, food, and movement. Personality is formed exclusively through what a man hears and through reading. Essence is purely emotional. It consists of what is received from heredity before the formation of personality, and later only those sensations and feelings among which a man lives. What comes after merely depends on the transition. So, Josh, I wanted to start with a question of asking you about this transition. So obviously with our essence, it's there, but our personality is getting going and sort of stifle our essence down. But he's saying here, it depends on where we're born, who we're born, grow up with and things like that. So this is why it's so different for everyone. Would you concur with
that? Yeah. Like you say, he kind of describes those sort of 3, aspects or natures, or you could say like even worlds that make up the human being. Each of us. So we have a personality, nature of personality, physical nature, bodily nature, and an essence. Essence nature, and obviously they play different roles. You could say in our life, like our earthly life and beyond, if there is, beyond. And you could say that because they have a different nature, they kind of require a different kind of food, and, to feed on a different kind of like process or work of development, And like he says, that because they have different natures, they're kind of dependent on different kind of influences, So like he kind of sort of implies there that the essence is partially kind of hereditary, like part of your essence will be influenced by your kind of like genetic line, like your parents and grandparents and so on. So that will play some part of it. But he also kind of suggests that, I think maybe in that talk as well or elsewhere, that obviously the essence has something it's kind of pre-incarnation to it, pre-incarnate. That's not to do with your physical nature or your genes, So there are obviously some influences to do with your essence that aren't hereditary, So it's kind of like, I suppose then as you're born or incarnated, you take a certain amount of the material of your essence from who your parents are going to be, and they're like, genetic line, but you also take some material from like the collective, human essence, material. And so when you're born, that the nature of your essence is going to shape your life, externally and also internally, like your thoughts and your feelings and your inner world in a particular way. It's going to dictate the kind of, you could say, the circumstances to an extent that you're going to encounter in your life. Not necessarily like physical circumstances, but maybe certain themes or recurring, kind of experiences that occur in your life, rather than the specific, situations that are means for those experiences or themes. And so, it's going to determine, you could say, the kind of people that you might meet, or the kind of experiences that you might have, and the way you kind of will see the world. And because everybody gets a particular kind of essence or individual essence nature, then that determines how we see other people. It's like we all get a certain vantage point, on ourselves and on the world, So I mean, we have those 3 sides of our nature that we're born with, and they each require a different kind of line of work, and our essence can be informed by obviously early life. When you're growing up and a baby and things, early life experiences, they play a big, role in shaping our essence, and you could say our personality and things as well. Like the kid, obviously, like the family unit or whoever's serving that role in our life. Those early experiences, very formative. Like he says a lot, Gurdjieff, like that it's very rare, like in our modern life, for a child to be born into a kind of you could almost say like normal sort of family unit with people who are kind of like what he would say like a normal condition. So of course that adds another layer of, you could say, a problem into the situation in terms of human development. Like, we're not landing in, you could say, situations that are perfectly suited for the development of our essence or our personality or whatever, so we have extra problems to deal with.
So most families are dysfunctional already, aren't they?
Yeah. So, like, because our essence is landing in those kind of, we're landing in a situation like where our parents and stuff, you could say, are not fully developed, beings themselves, so therefore, like, it's going to be hard for them to serve, like, that appropriate role of a caretaker and an educator to us, to those different sides of our nature. It's going to be hard for the average parent to, be able to provide that kind of multi-layered education, because if they're stunted in their own essence growth, then they're not going to have the education, or you could say the means to do that. So, like he says, because of the way, our kind of collective situation is, our essence, when we reach, maturity, then, like, say 18 or whatever, we tend to have a stunted essence, an essence that's still at the, kind of at the level of what he says, like a child, and he uses the child there as an analogy, like, when we were a young child, if you look back, like, say, before you've acquired language and things, it's hard to imagine, unless you can remember, what your kind of experience of the world is like, or other people, in terms of how screened off you are. Like, because I don't have language as a child, I'm kind of removed from the world of language. There's just, like, language could just appear as sound, I don't have access to that world of meaning yet, So our essence is like that. It's like, in terms of how it can perceive the world or participate in the world, it's like it's like our essence is doesn't know language, or essence language, or whatever would be the appropriate language, you could say, for the essence. So therefore it can't really participate much in the world of essence, and that world will appear kind of very distorted, isn't it? Like, if you're young, it's like if you were transported now to an alien planet and you didn't speak their language, then you can see, physically what's going on and stuff, but you don't have you can't really get much of a meaning there. You can't participate in the inner kind of side of it. So you could say our essence is like that. When we grow up, we can have a certain connection to you could say, the world of essence, or, our essence is present in us and it's functioning to some degree. So we are kind of receiving essence impressions or essence food. But subjectively, how much we kind of get it, or are aware of that or receive of that, it's very watered down. Because, like I say, our essence is, stunted in its growth.
So I was wondering if, when we're born into our families, do you think that's karmic? Or would Gurdjieff say, no, you're just born into any family that happens to be available at the time? I just suddenly came into my head when you was talking about it.
I think, like, so that the notion would go that like, you think there'd be some kind of process that tried to suit the sort of life conditions that you were born into, like the location and the parents. There'd be, like, some process to try to match that to suit, your individual essence, or this part of your essence that's not, determined by, like, heredity. The part of your essence that's going to be incarnated into a particular line of heredity. You think there'd be some process that tries to match the people who you're going to be born into in those conditions to match your essence, like, to, so it lands in conditions that are fertile, for its growth. So you could say, if we're talking about what organizes that as karma, then it would be karmic, like, who you would be born into, at least to an extent. Like, the way Gurdjieff talks about that kind of law of karma, he says it's, to an extent, it works by sort of averages, or there are certain limits. Like, if you're the intelligence that's doing that work, then you've got a certain number of people who are being born every day, and there's a limit to, like, the number of places, do you see what I mean, that you could put these people on the earth. So there would be certain limits there in terms of how you could, match the essences to those conditions. You see what I mean? It wouldn't be like a perfectly, lawful process, in the sense that you would be, you'd be limited to what the conditions, what were possible in those conditions. So it would be mostly karmic, but it's like saying there is also a certain amount of chance, you could say that, or just limitation, working with the conditions as they are. So that's what we say, that maybe nature, or whatever karma, does the best it can for us in terms of, like, putting the seeds, our essence, into conditions that are, as good as it can be, but there are still limitations on that.
I was thinking that maybe also because I myself realize now that the parents I've got, I've learned a lot from, or has helped me with my development. Though when I was a teenager, they were really annoying. I see how it was helping me develop myself. You know, like Gurdjieff talks about, you know, got to tolerate people's how they are. You know, and I'm like many people. My parents drove me nuts, but
Yeah.
I find from a lot of people that get in touch with me through this channel, a lot of their suffering is still hang-ups with their parents. So you'd think like with heredity, maybe we're put there because we've got to learn certain lessons, which I know sounds like a really new age thing, and I hate saying it like that, but I wonder if Gurdjieff would think of it from that way as well. Because
Yeah, well, I think to the extent that he says that there are different, you know, there's a kind of a different intelligence or different laws that are at work concerning our essence than our physical body and personality, then to that extent I think he would agree that yeah, there is an intelligence or there are laws at work that would be involved in putting essences into situations that would correspond. Like it makes sense that an essence would, you know, would land in a situation that was as best as possible and, you know, suited to correspond to that essence and its development. So I mean, that is like saying to an extent, well yeah, you're born into the particular parents that you are or situation because that's like, you know, the best situation that could be provided maybe for your, you know, individual development. But again, we're saying that the best in terms of what's available, you know, we're still saying that there are some limits and chance or hazard involved in that, you know, because when we're talking about the essence incarnating into earth, you know, so it's like that comes under the laws of the earth, you know, which you could say are more limited. You could say they're more mechanical, but you could say there's also more accident there. You know, again, like Gurdjieff talks about the different laws that pertain to those different sides of our being. You know, like he talked about the law of accident and the law of fate and the law of will. Mm-hmm. So, you know, in our sort of normal physical life, there is this, it does accommodate for accident. You know, there are things that happen in the sort of physical world that aren't, you know, they're lawful, you could say, but the laws just determine them on a general scale. You know, they're not necessarily completely lawful at the individual instances, you know.
And they affect our personality more, don't they? Law of accident.
Well, it would go both ways because, in like you say, yeah, you could say that it would be mainly our personality that we would be using to navigate that world of accident. It'd be our, you know, the personality that was the vehicle for us to engage, like in the physical world. But the personality is linked to the essence in the sense that, well, we are the essence is to an extent needs the personality to grow. Like I say, we're incarnated for a reason. So yeah, though those laws, let's say they're only applied to of accident, only applied to personality, they would have ramifications at the level of the essence or fate. So again, that's why like there needs to be a process that could between those different worlds, you know, like some balance, like, you know, and that's where the problems come in, like navigating between those different worlds, like the world of essence and the world of personality and the different laws. You know, how can these different worlds be reconciled? It's like they can only be partially reconciled, and that's where there's like risk and, you know, hazard coming to it. So yeah, it's like you're born into the world, and there can be the physical world, you know, allows for accident, you know, like chance and hazard. But that's the only means that we have for the essence's development, at least during life. You see what I mean? So, of course, whether the essence gets to kind of like develop during life, it's partially determined by, you could say, laws at the level of the essence, laws of fate. You know, like maybe it's not present, it's not fated for this essence to achieve a particular development. You know, that could be at the level of the essence. You know, but maybe the essence does have a certain potential. But again, that's going to be limited to some extent by what happens at the level of the personality and the level of the world. You know,
I think some people find it difficult to know whether it is their essence that's coming through or not, or whether they're getting it confused. Do you have anything to say for people on that?
Yeah, well, again, like it's hard one obviously to talk about, but I think in some of the literature, like say in Search of the Miraculous, where, you know, Aspetsky talks about essence or talks about Gurdjieff talking about it, a lot of the time it's only sort of he only kind of talks about it in kind of general, vague ways, you could say. Like he says he just sort of implies that, yeah, essence is kind of, he says it's like what you're born with, you know. He says it's not, it's what you're born into the world with already. You don't acquire it from your experiences, you know, in life. You know, the material of essence is like, yeah, he says something you're born with, as compared to the personality, which he says is something that you use for gaining impressions and material from, you could say, the physical world of people. You know?
I think also because he was talking about in that quote about the free bodies. You've got the free bodies in the personality, but they're also in the essence. There's free in everything, isn't it? Everything's got free centers. So that makes it even more confusing as to which center's trying to talk to me, and whether that's a personality center or an essence center.
Yeah, like what I was saying with the mention it in Search for Miraculous, like he says, yeah, it's something you're born with. So again, it can be a very vague description. It's just described by comparison to the personality as something that, you know, is of the world, and, you know, it acquires things. So that's one description, but it doesn't tell you much about the essence itself. And then the only other kind of describing thing, you know, ways he talks about it is in terms of like qualities. You know, like characteristics that you could say, oh, well, somebody maybe has a timid essence, or maybe someone has a brash essence, whatever. So, you know, we only have those sort of characteristics, those terms, as ways to like describe it or point to the essence. You know, you could say that how a person's essence would express, you know, in their life could be through some of these primary characteristics or tendencies like that they could have. You know, like certain tendencies could be apparent in one very young child to another. Like one could appear, you know, timid, and one could appear confident or brash. You know, even at a very young age, you could see the certain, you know, variation. And you could say that that's an appearance of essence. Like, but again, it's appearing. You're seeing it through the physical screen. You know, you're seeing it as a, you know, a kind of a physical expression of the essence. You see what I mean? It's not like saying that the essence is just those characteristics. Like the essence is goodness or shyness or timidness or brashness. You see what I mean? It's not saying that the essence is just a collection of those characteristics or qualities. You know, like it can express in those kind of qualities, or that sort of emotional side of our nature, or characteristics that we can have and seem to have from a young age or are born with. But again, that's just kind of how the essence would express in, or how we could perceive it in the physical world, you know. Of itself, it would be like, well, you'd have to kind of equate it with, you could say then, what we might talk of as like the soul or something, or the human spirit. And obviously, because it's not of our physical nature, you know, it's essential rather than existential. And he kind of speaks it about it as what our soul can develop from. You know, like he says, kind of the essence maturity is like the soul or real I. So in that sense, you could imagine it as like, yeah, almost like a material or a seed or a potential from which our, I don't know, then soul, you know, human soul, human spirit can grow from. So in that sense, again, it looks quite different to just a collection of like what we would call like almost personality traits or characteristics. Do you see what I mean? Because you're talking about whatever is a sort of our individuation at the level of soul or spirit. Do you see what I mean? Like everybody partakes of, you know, the collective human essence, but we all have a sort of individualized form of it, you know. So it's the essence kind of refers to what is the seed of our, you know, individuation, our true individuation.
I'm glad you said that, because when I first got into the Gurdjieff work and learned about the essence and the personality, I used to think that when the essence comes through it's going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to realize, no, we're also working on the essence. The essence needs to learn as it's going through as well. And we're trying to make sure that comes out to the best of its ability of what it can do. It's like what you're saying, it's different for everyone. Which is why I think sometimes I wonder if my personality kind of tried to trick me into thinking it was my essence.
Yeah. Well, again, he says that like because of like how our human nature, that we have like an essence and a personality, we have these different, you know, kind of natures or sides to us, and also because of the situations that we're like born into, that like it's you know, it's kind of becomes natural for us to experience confusion in that sense, in being able to, you could say, discern these different sides of our nature, or impulses that may be coming from those different sides of our nature. And like what that position is, like what he talks about in terms of false personality, you know, like there can be a misworking, you know, between our essence and our personality, these two different sides of our nature. You know, there can be confusion, or like a non-appropriate relationship. Like, again, he says that our essence should be the, you know, it should be the dominant player in our being, the kind of, you know, you could say controller or director, and the personality is just supposed to be there as a kind of, you could say, a tool or an apparatus or a means for it to use, you know, and to grow. But you know, the relationship doesn't come to function like that. And he says personality tends to be what plays the dominant role in us, you know, in terms of dictating our actions and our perceptions, our experience of the world. You know, we tend to be more centered. You know, you could say our consciousness or our awareness or our attention tends to be more centered in personality, you know, looking through the screen of personality. And when we're in that situation, he says that, yeah, that's natural because that's not intended, you could say then, that there has to be certain coping mechanisms developed, or certain you know, consequences come from that situation, you know, being centered in the personality and not being centered in our essence. And one expression for that is like, yeah, false personality. You know, our personality assuming a role and like function that's not intended for it, and becoming like inverted. Like, you could say it wouldn't be too bad if we were centered in personality, if our personality was functioning appropriately, you know. But because it can function, you could say, inappropriately, then that causes a sort of an extra layer of problems, you know. But yeah, I agree with you. When people come, you know, to read the terminology, again, you're not given that much direction or information in terms of like being able to discern in yourself or discriminate between essence and personality, although you're told that it's an important thing, you know. So you can only point, you know, giving general advice, you're pretty limited in what you can say to people. You can say to look, you know, observe yourself and look back as much as you can through your memory to like your early childhood. And you could try to see, again, talking in terms of characteristics, like qualities, character traits, you could try to see certain things that seem to be present with you since birth and seem to be a, you know, a dominant thread throughout your life, you know. So you could look at exploring essence that way, looking into what are some of these deep, you know, seated characteristics or character traits, you know, that I seem to have, you know, or seem to be expressed in my life. That's one way of looking at it. And I'd say the other way of looking at it is in terms of like, you could look at it in terms of altered states. Like, okay, you could say that a lot of what we take to be spiritual experiences, like experiences outside of the norm, that they tend to be of the essence. You could say that that's, you know, something happens and our consciousness kind of becomes more shifted to the essence. You could say that, you know, that can give quite intense experiences, as is comparatively, if we've been living sort of in the personality, then the world of essence is like much more expansive. And so it can, a lot of those experiences, of higher consciousness, that you could say they just come from a connection with our essence. And so you could see, well, what is a common, and if you've had experiences yourself that you consider to be like moments of higher consciousness, then you could look to what is maybe is there a common thread there, or what are the qualities that maybe are present in that kind of experience. And you could say, well, that might correspond to my essence or essence. And obviously a common thing that's reported in those kind of experiences is kind of like often a kind of a sense of eternity, or a kind of a timelessness. You know, again, people talk about, you could say, the now, the present moment, and how it, you know, if you're fully present, there isn't the kind of same notion or experience of time, let's say. So again, that would suggest then that the essence is like that. It's kind of eternal in nature, you know, or that if you're kind of more connected with your essence, then your experience of, let's say, time, then is going to be quite different to that which you experience with personality. You know, it'll have a kind of eternal nature to it, eternal aspect to it, or non-linear. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you can see that you're sort of limited to using these kind of vague terms to try to describe essence. But that's an important one, that again, essence is, when he talks about it, it's described as being a higher world. He talks about the world of essence with its laws, and then there's like the world of personality, or the world of the earth with its laws. So he talks about it as something kind of extra dimensional, kind of non-physical, and yet able to interact with physicality. So yeah, it's you could say it's the side of your being that's eternal. That's not, it doesn't kind of enter into linear time, like the kind of time of the body. Although, of course, it's through the essence that you can experience, incarnation of the body.
I often get people worried about what Gurdjieff says about crystallizing wrongly. And my answer to that has always been to them, well, if you can see that you've changed over the, look back at yourself from 6 months ago and you can see you've changed for the better in some way, then you're doing okay. But if you can see that you're staying the same, because we should be changing, we should be evolving, like you're saying, our essence and our personality should be growing. But do you have any like warning signs for people if they are beginning to perhaps go down the wrong path, perhaps crystallizing in a way that's perhaps more detrimental to their essence, but is helping them in their personality still, maybe?
Well, obviously, yeah, I mean, it's a hard one to give like general advice in that one. I mean, again, some of the kind of like, main tenets of the work, one is like like empathy and conscience, and so hopefully they should play a greater part, but of course we're always subject to like self-deception. So someone could think, oh well, yeah, I look back and I'm much more compassionate now, and so you're always reliant on your own judgment there. But yeah, if it becomes evident to you that you don't seem to be maybe becoming more compassionate towards other people, or more able to you could say regulate your behavior or overcome some of the issues that you've identified, then you could suggest that maybe that at least it doesn't seem to be, maybe you're making progress, but of course it's hard to it's hard to even subjectively define what progress is going to look like for you. I mean, we obviously we begin this work and we have all some ideas about what the progress is for us and what that's going to look like.
Yeah, you just don't want to be the same person that you was a couple of years ago. We want to hope that you've, as an individual, has changed for the better, as you're going through doing this work. This work should be working on you. If you're reading the books or listening to the Gurdjieff music, which is a fantastic way if you're really stuck, I think, is just put one of the Gurdjieff tunes on, tracks. The right one will come to you and you can feel it doing something to you, can't you?
Yeah, and like I suppose like another big thing they talk about in the work is understanding, like that we that we are looking for, seeking a change, or development in our understanding. So that's another one we can try to, again, it's another one that's hard to judge, subjectively for yourself, but that's something you can look at, like has my understanding, then you could say, of the world or the work, does that seem to have changed or evolved over time? But like again, with how Gurdjieff kind of outlines the sort of plan of development, then it suggests that there, you could say there are stages then, and that there are marked transitions in it, marked points of change. Like again, if you start to, if as it's said, we kind of just centered in the world of personality, and that's mostly what our consciousness is, occupied with. Then if we start to have, moments of experience of the essence, then it will be markedly different. Like you will notice it, and like that's what we say. These experiences of altered consciousness, whether we call it higher or lower, then, but they are stark and evident. So you could say if you're having more, experiences like that, in which you're discovering or being exposed to something that's radically different to your normal experience, and at least you could say it's a positive sign, in the sense that at least it's a sign of change. You're experiencing new stuff, new new material, so that's a primary source of learning. I mean, that's not to say that the experiences in themselves may be great and positive. I mean, they may be, but the fact that you've experienced, there's the potential for learning there. So you could ask yourself that question: am I having changes in, significant changes in my experience? Am I experiencing new things? Again, with the essence, I would suggest that if you start experiencing that side of your nature, it'll affect your kind of your experience of definitely of like time, like, because for that nature we say that the kind of essence doesn't exist inside the line of linear time. So like it's quite possible again, like if you start to connect with your essence, you might have those classic experiences like clairvoyance or things like that, or because that's the side of our nature that can facilitate those kind of experiences that are not limited by what we consider to be linear time, like with your essence. And you could also link that to your subconscious. It's quite possible to like have experiences of the past, whether of your own, this lifetime or others, and also have experiences of the future again, whether they concern you in this life or other things. You can have real experiences of that kind of thing, and again, that would be obvious, your essence, that side of your nature that is some part of you that exists in another kind of dimensional world that's not bound by those same kind of like physical laws, the laws of like the physical world, physical bodies.
I've got to add to that though, that people do, like I myself got quite addicted into looking into my past lives and things like that, not future ones. And it is an addictive thing, but at the same time, it's not that essential unless you're going to get some kind of answer from perhaps doing, I don't know, a past life regression or something, or doing it in some kind of other way. So I do warn people that, suddenly you want to know more and more about everything, and then you stop concentrating on who you are now.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I mean, I'm just speaking about it in the sense that if you start to have maybe certain connections with that, your essence, or that side, that side of your consciousness, then it'll be quite likely that it's possible for it to manifest in those kind of experiences, like altered experiences of time in terms of like experiences of the past or experiences of the future. But also, so that's one side of it, that
I suppose I was trying to say, just don't get too addicted to that kind of thing.
Yeah,
like you say,
definitely.
It is important to do, yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about it in terms of seeking out like therapies for like past life regression. Again, if you're interested in that, that's great. But I'm just saying that those kind of experiences, that kind of thing can come of itself through, like connections with your essence. Again, you might not be seeking for that, those kind of experiences, but they may come about through maybe work that you do, or just come about unbidden, But I'm just saying that would be kind of indicative of that would be like an indicator of an essence kind of experience, if we say it's a genuine experience rather than just, imagination. But it would be their essence, that side of your nature that could do that, that's not limited to kind of linear time. So it's like, you do have a side of your nature, your being, that exists out of the, you could say outside of the physical world, or outside of the kind of time and space that are associated with the physical world. So, like you're saying, we can, we can be distracted by that, or think that might not have any application or in this life, you could say. But I was going to say that if you start to connect to the essence, the kind of practical value of that, you could say, in this life, or how you navigate your life, is that you can draw from, like, you could say, more of the totality of your experiences, because the essence, again, it's kind of, it holds all of those experiences, like everything you've ever experienced. It kind of holds all of that, but it's not holding it like in memory, like, like the same way our personality, like we can access our memories normally, but we do it through our, you could say, our personality, our sort of formatory apparatus, So it's just kind of accessing it as sort of data, you could say. And we have a very limited, kind of form of access. We can only sort of access one memory at a time, you could say, So we experience a kind of segregation from our own experience. You could say that's like a good definition of sleep, a kind of inner, you could say, like schizophrenia, inner division, inner fragmentation, which means that whichever is the fragment that's kind of, being the director, isn't able to draw from the whole of yourself, So that's like saying our little sort of present consciousness that has to act in the moment to deal with things, it doesn't have access to the whole wealth of its experience, and that causes problems, And you could say that's why we can act in sort of or often act in ways that we regret, or that seem counter to maybe our aims or intentions, is because in the moment we're not able to connect, you could say, with the whole of us, or with those parts of our nature that have those aims or have had those realizations. So if we connect more with our essence, it's like saying, yeah, in the moment, in life, you have more potential to draw from, you could say, the whole of your experience, individual experiences, and just, like, you could say, things that you've maybe even learned that you didn't know you'd learned.
So, because it's all very experiential, what we're saying here. But I know encountering other people in our lives, obviously, that aren't in the work or doing anything like this, like there's a lot of people that just have no interest in this whatsoever. So they don't have the, like, I want to say, the connection of doing something like that. And then it kind of, like, if it's your, I don't know, your loved ones or your family or whatever, you kind of get caught up in their, I don't know what to call it, their unconnected way of living. What am I trying to say? So you can view it on other people. You can see how other people are not doing the work that we are trying to do, and maybe use that as an example for ourselves. But it's very difficult to live with them kinds of people, but we're with them every day. So, Gurdjieff's saying this is why he does this work, isn't it? So we can learn to live in this world with these people that aren't interested in this. Their development will come along in some other life or whatever. Now I forgot what I was going to say about that. Oh, of being aware of not everybody's doing this, but we still mustn't let them stop us doing it. We mustn't let them hinder us.
Yeah. Well, like he makes it clear with one of his big, sort of pieces of advice or practical, recommendation in terms of, like, not being identified, or bearing the unpleasant manifestations of other people. So I mean, even, and like at the level of the essence, because we're born with a particular kind of essence, that of itself is going to, you could say, cause problems, in the sense that there are always going to be other essence types that we are more get on better with or don't. Like, there's a kind of, like, he talks about it in terms of, like, affinity of vibrations. Again, he talks about almost like in terms of, like, a chemical reaction or something like that. There's certain essences that react violently with other ones. So it's like, even in a world where everybody was kind of, like, working towards that kind of aim, there would still be personal frictions, you could say, that we would have to deal with, because of the nature of our different essences and things. So it's like saying, there's always going to be some kind of friction that's going to be present in our life with other people, and that, like he says, we need to develop ways of dealing with that, like being able to manage that so it doesn't just express in negative behavior and conflict. And he also says that we have to, not only can we just not express that friction, we can also use it. Like he says, it's a source of energy that you can actually use for your own development. You can not just stop it from expressing negatively, but you can upcycle it. It has a potential value, like composting. You can make something for yourself from it, as well as do less damage to others. Do you know what I mean? Like, live in a more peaceful way. But definitely that kind of friction at the level of the essence, as well as, like, the personality, is something that he says that it's always going to be something we're going to have to deal with.
Because I think I myself used to find that difficult to understand that bit. How do I use it to my way? I used to read a lot of Bruce Lee and watch Chinese films, and like, you use that energy for your, you turn that energy around and use it for yourself and things like that. I understand it now, obviously, but for some people it's difficult, because really it's just not giving in to their demands or their bad behavior or whatever, not falling foul of it, and instead being considerate, the old external considering as to why they're being like that.
Like, I mean, that he did, again, that's another thing you could say, another benefit or possible benefit of his kind of presentation of man as machines, that in the sense that there could be an opportunity for a person to exercise compassion towards others, because they can view them and see them as machines. Just as you could say, if I can see I am a machine, then that enables me, hopefully, to show compassion to other people as machines. So, like, yeah, he says, looking at people that way, there is definitely a potential there to maybe to be more compassionate, you know, and again, not just to be more compassionate for the sake of others, which is great, but also for yourself. That if I see people say mechanically, then it possibly provides me with the opportunity to get less pissed off with them, or you know what I mean. So that saves me that energy. If I see, you know what I mean, if I can see people in that way, then I can allow them to be, you could say, machines, and that saves me the energy, some of the energy, then possibly some unnecessary suffering connected with judgment, or you know, expecting them to behave in, you know, ways that they can't, you know.
I remember you once saying to me, I said to you, we were having a chat and I was going, yeah, I'm going to a church tonight to go and, you know, steal the prayers, because that's something Gurdjieff said. And I remember you saying to me, put on my black and white thieves top and take my swag bag. But to some people, they don't quite know what Gurdjieff meant by that. Can you explain that more about when he used to say about go to a church and steal the prayers?
Well, I like you say, it kind of bears relation to what he says about our general life, like that people are going to be a source of disturbance for us, you know, because, like you could say, just because of the nature of individual humans, we have different essences, and some are going to get on other than that. So even at the level of human life, he says there's going to be like friction. You know, you're going to be disturbed, upset by other people in some way or another. You know, you're going to be ruffled. Your feathers are going to be upset. There's going to be like a portion of daily suffering that you're going to be, you know, kind of expected to deal with. You know, like he says, willy-nilly, you're going to suffer. You know, so the kind of question is, what do you want to do in that situation, or is there any what can you do? You know, how can you possibly turn this situation to your account, or if there is a higher purpose, then you know, how could you turn it to account of that? And in terms of dealing with other people, then like, yeah, how can you use that friction, you know, the natural resistances and judgments and, you know, things that come up with other people, how can you use that to your own, you know, your own end? Well, the first kind of possible use is for observation. It's like, can I look into why? You know, why does this person piss me off, or why am I pissed off in this situation with this person? And like, again, not just take that at face value, whatever is my face value story at why I'm pissed off. So can I just, you know, take a moment to look a little bit, you know, deeper into it to see if it is that the way I see it. And then also there's the possibility there to ask the question, you could say, like, you know, who, sounds a little bit more esoteric, who is it that is pissed off by that? What is it in me that gets pissed off by this, and why, you know? So there's the opportunity there to, again, for like self-inquiry, and that can possibly yield like some understanding or insight that might serve you, you know, in the future. So that's one way of using the energy to your account, just like as a means of observation and self-inquiry. And you could say that the part of the hope with that is to see that, you could say that the side of us that does react at that level, you know, that does get pissed off, is, you could say, it's just one side of us. It's not the whole of us. Do you know what I mean? It's like, say, learn that if we study those opportunities, they possibly give us that, yeah, the opportunity to see something in us that's beyond that, or something more, to see that we're more than just, you could say, a reactive self side of us that, you know, that does get pissed off with other people. So in studying that, you know, there is the opportunity there to, you could say, go beyond your reactive self, or to connect with the side of you that's deeper than that, you know. And again, that would be the side of us that would be linked with like what he calls like conscience, or real compassion, you know. Because again, you could say that why we tend to react to people, or why they cause us suffering, is because we're situated in ourselves at that sort of level, you know, because we're in inner conflict. That's why other people can, you know, cause us conflict, you know? Like, again, if you could say that if we were Christ, then we probably wouldn't have the same issues towards people that we do, or they at least wouldn't cause us suffering in the same way. You see what I mean?
Not I, but Christ in me.
So again, I'm just saying that that's one possible way that you could use the suffering in terms of a means of inquiry that could potentially take you, like, again, to a realization of a side of yourself that's beyond that. You could call it the reactive self, the self that's constantly in conflict with other people because it sees itself as separate to other people. Like again, he kind of says that Gurdjieff, that the only way forward for man, you know, in terms of like peace and things like that, is conscience, like this organ conscience has to come to expression and manifestation in man, and that the primary like function of that is to show man, not just theoretically, but like in a literal, tangible experience, that he is one with his brother. You know, that they're like literally one body, one flesh. You know, like they say, my brother in Christ. You know, so yeah, the idea is that will give you a tangible experience, and that's the only thing that can overcome, you could say, the sort of ego. You know, the side of us that sees in terms of self and other. You know, that doesn't actually literally see, although it can kind of theoretically account that this other person is, you know, in some way my brother, but it can't live that experience. You know what I mean? It can't really feel the other person like literally as its own body. You know, so therefore it's not able to to act in that way. You know? Like the ego will never be able to kind of, you could say, love its brother, even though it could achieve a certain amount of peace on earth, you know, through laws and sanctions and things like external needs, you know. But it can never truly love his brother because the other is always other, you know, for the ego. So yeah, it's a roundabout way of saying that through exploring your own suffering, that can provide like an insight into, you could say, conscience, you know, through like truly trying to like sincerely ask like, who is it in me that suffers and why, you know, and trying to go into that can take you, you know, beyond that side. In terms of the stealing in the church one, like how could you like make use of the energy? Then again, that's like saying, if you go into a building, then the church or some place where people are praying, then, or even like a sacred site or something like that, you could say that you could go there with an aim. You know, you'd probably be better to approach it with having some aim in mind that you wanted to use that energy for. You know what I mean? Rather than just going, oh, I'm going to go and get this energy, but not really having any idea what you want to do with it. Like you could make a decision, or you could say a wish. You know, like I'm going to go to this church and I'm going to ask to receive some of the energy that's available there for a particular reason. Like ask, you know, make a wish, you could say, and then you could go to the church. And again, I would say if there are other people there, then try to connect with them. Again, like you could say through your heart and compassion, in the sense of really opening yourself up to the reality of the other people who may be there praying, and they're like, you could say they're suffering their situation and their hopes and dreams. Again, like what Gurdjieff says with conscience, like in Beelzebub's Tales, he hoped, didn't he, that it was Beelzebub's advice, suggestion to God that the only thing that could save man would be like a new organ that would function like, I think he says like the Kundabuffer, but in the opposite way, that it would make, that it would make people aware of the reality of the death of their neighbor. You know what I mean? So you could go into the church and try to connect with that, like try to put your attention on the other people and feel like, you could say, that the reality of their death, you know, what might be involved in that, what that might mean, you know. And so then you could open to, you could say, any emotional stimulation that might come through that. Like you might be hopefully emotionally moved, perhaps, might open into that, you know, the reality of the death of your brother. Then if any emotional stimulation did come through that, again, that would be the moment to try to connect that with your wish. You see what I mean? That would be the moment to, you could say, remember your wish, your aim, and you try to, you could say, literally blend it with the energy that comes at that moment of emotional stimulation. And again, that would be like something in lines with trying to create a new, what would they call, like a new site, you know, a new synaptic connection in your brain, a new neural pathway, you know, like you're taking a moment to connect your wish, your aim, with, like, you could say, a higher source of energy that's been granted to you in that moment. Like you've gone to the church and you've kind of fed off the other people in the sense that you've stimulated compassion in yourself, which is, you could say, is a higher emotional energy. And then you're making the intentional effort to connect that energy with whatever your aim is, you know, or wish.
And when you're doing that, you're being conscious of what you're doing as well, because you've gone with your aim and you're working on it. So that's another good thing, that you're being awake and conscious.
Yeah, and so like that's one way of doing it, going with like an aim in mind, and then trying to receive or stimulate yourself in some way. And you could just go there with no aim in mind and just open yourself up, like to any extra energy that might be available there. You know, again, like you said, that would probably involve trying to do like inner work, you know, with your attention to bring yourself into a more receptive state. You know, if you're there and you're just distracted and looking at the watch, the stuff that you probably don't, you know, so you probably want to try to bring yourself into a, you know, a more aware state so that you might be able to receive or get an insight. You know, something might be shown to you. You know, again, because you could say, if you're going to if you're going to steal, then again you're going with the assumption that you're able to steal. You could say, I mean, which means that you're going there with the assumption that you might be able to make use more fruitful use of some energy that might be there. Like, again, there might be a lot of people that are praying in the church, but like what Gurdjieff says, their energy might be, you know, not enough by itself to really do anything, in which case it doesn't really go anywhere and just kind of, you could say, stays there, or, you know, in the atmosphere of the church, permeates it.
Yeah, he says they're not very I don't think it's honorable prayers, but it's something like, you know, it's just, well, I don't know, it's little prayers. They're not fully aimed or thoughtful or conscious prayers, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, he says that the general quality of the person's prayer doesn't, you know, because it doesn't go anywhere, and that's why there's kind of some energy, you could say, built up. So, you know, you kind of go in there with the under, you could say, the intention then to make use of any energy that's available there. You could even, once say not stealing, you could say, I'm just going there to see if there's any excess available energy, you know, that it might not be going anywhere, you know. So yeah, and again, he says that if you're going to do that, it's probably best to assume at least that you're going to be asked to repay that. You know, that's why I say you'd probably be best to do that if you have a specific aim, and obviously it's going to be an aim that you consider to be valuable, you know, and also if you have an aim that you consider to be beyond just your own personal, you know, satisfaction. You know, like you could say that I'm going there to steal some energy in the hope that in the future I will be able to repay it back. You could say you're making a deal or hoping to make a deal.
Yeah, you're not making a deal with the devil. But you could always say that the people that whose prayers you're stealing.
Yeah. I mean, you could look at it. You could look at the other way. You could say that, oh, I go to a church and maybe, like, again, I try to do something to raise my own state of being, and maybe I make my own wish. But who knows? Maybe if you're there and you're making a greater effort, then you might be able to make something available for the other people there. You see what I mean? So it could go, you know, go both ways. Like, it doesn't. I think, again, in one sense, I think why he uses this term stealing is a bit tongue in cheek, you know, or just to make the point.
Tongue in cheek, isn't he?
Yeah, or just to point to the issue. Like he says, yeah, there is energy available at certain places and sacred sites or in gatherings of humans. There is energy that's liberated and is available. So someone could go and, if they were able, assimilate it, make use of it. But of course, like he says, it brings up the moral question in terms of like what you're going to do with that energy, or are you going to be indebted, you know, in debt for doing that?
Yeah, I know people that used to dabble in magic, and they used to like to call up, you know, old gods or whatever. And I remember one person saying that an old god, I won't say which one it was, but an old god did turn up. And then they've looked at him as if to say, yeah, what do you want? But they didn't know, they just did it because they thought, oh, have fun to call up the old god.
Exactly.
Like, go call up the old gods, at least have something ready to say to them, or
it'd be like it's like something out of a, you know, a comedy movie. Like sometimes when they portray that in a comedy movie, like you'll have a load of, you know, misfits or stoners around a Ouija board or something, and then something will appear. You know, they didn't really want it to appear, or they weren't doing it with an intention. And you know, it's like, well, what do you want, lad? I don't know.
That pisses again off.
But yeah, that would be a classic one. You know, that again, we can have all these sort of you could say curiosities or like wishes, but they tend to be just at, like, yeah, like you say, at the level of the personality. In which case, then, if something real did turn up, then you wouldn't be able to make use of it, or you wouldn't have like a question, because again, those questions and that interest was just at the level of your personality. So, you know. So like, if you were exposed to the real, you wouldn't be able to make anything of it. You know, again, that's kind of like what this he kind of talks about with the Gurdjieff, with the higher worlds, or you know, like he says, we do have
says, sorry, you broke up.
Like Gurdjieff, Gurdjieff.
Right. Yep.
Just like Gurdjieff, doesn't he? He says that, you know, there are these higher worlds, or we have a side of our nature that exists on these planes, you know, these higher planes than the physical one. So we kind of already exist in the, you could say, all the worlds or all the planes. But it's just like, you could say, on the higher ones, he says that our form of presence in those higher worlds is undeveloped. Like we're asleep, you could say, or like the child in those higher sides of our nature. So those worlds are relatively, like you could say, closed off to us, or we're not very aware of them. You know? And that's like part of the work to kind of open, you could say, those sides of our nature that are on those higher planes, then, or like our essence and things like that. You know, to become awake at those levels. You know.
You said something quite relevant. Well, you always say something relevant throughout everything you said, but something you were saying earlier about state of being. And really, that's what I suppose we're discussing, is of developing your personality and your essence. It's because we want the right quality to develop our state of being.
Yeah, exactly. Like he says, yeah, finding ways of working on those different sides of your nature. Like, again, he talks about it in terms of, you could say, the three brains. You know, like we have a thinking brain, a feeling brain, and like a sensing brain, a body brain. And they each need their own kind of food, or kind of have a, you know, a corresponding line of work. So yeah, like finding ways to feed those different sides of you know, of our nature. You know, it's like saying again, we exist in like a world of thought, you know, a world of feeling, and a world of sensation. You know, it's like, so you could say we have like a mental body, which would be that which gives us access to the realm of thought. I mean, you know, now we just call that the brain or the mind or whatever, but it's just another way of talking about it. Like we have some presence in the mental world. You know, that's what gives us access to, you could say, the thoughts or whatever, and that through work we could develop the kind of presence, you know, access we have to that mental world. The same with our, like, our body and our feelings, you know. And like particularly with what Gurdjieff talks about, the higher bodies, he says that they come from, you could say, inner work, you know, like work we do on those bodies that concern the inner world, like, you know, the body of thought and feeling, you could say, that they're kind of developed from those functions, you know.
Well, I think we've given people enough to think about tonight. And so I want to thank you, Josh, very much for doing this. It's great. And if you just want to tell everybody your blog page again, so that people, and I'll try and remember to put it in the notes as well, the link to it.
Yeah, it's just it's a WordPress site. I mean, the title of the page is The Tapestry of Beelzebub's Tales. But if you type in Gurdjieff and Beelzebub WordPress, then it'll take you to the site.
And we're hoping that we're thinking of doing another Q&A session, aren't we? So I'm going to put a little community page up for people if you want to leave questions, and then we'll tackle them in our next show.
Yeah, God willing.
But thank you very much, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. Yeah, it's fun as always, listening to me natter.
Well, I always enjoy it. I always learn something new, and it always helps me clarify a few things that I'm a bit, you know, spiderwebby about.
Yeah, well, like I say, it's always good. It's always good to, you know, we need the gathering, the people to come together and, you know, exchange. You know, you could say there's no way that's in isolation. You know, we are collective beings. We need other people. So the way it's made by people, you know, we're all reliant on other people. You can't make it alone, you know.
And that is a very important thing, even though sometimes we all feel that we are very alone doing this, but there are other people out there and we can help each other. Yeah.
And they say, you know, again, it's a kind of, you know, esoteric idea, but that supposedly we're all supported by each other. You know, like your efforts, whatever efforts you make, they don't just go towards, you know, you could say your own account, but some portion of that goes to help some other portion who's struggling with trying to find his way, you know. So that's another thing you could say that could be, you know, essence food, trying to feel into that, you know. People could say it's just imagination, but whatever, it might be useful imagination, just to feel that, you know, whatever you're feeling, obviously you're never the only person feeling that, If I wake up and I feel like, oh, it's a shit day, and you know, some suffering, then somebody else is feeling that as well. But that also means that somebody else at that moment is in ecstasy, jumping for joy, or you know. So that would be another way of stealing, tapping into the, you know, tapping into the collective field.
Well, hopefully everybody's tapped into this show, and I'm going to press this stop button. So thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Gurdjieff. Until next time, peace, everybody.